What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? Frank Delaney sat alone in his small, dimly lit kitchen, the hum of a late summer storm vibrating softly against the windowpane. Outside, the trees bowed under the wind, leaves rattling like whispers of the past, while inside, the house felt cold despite the heater humming quietly in the background. He stared at the birthday card in front of him, one he had bought for himself weeks ago but never had the courage to open until now. It was a card that read, "Happy 72nd birthday," bright and cheerful, an ironic contrast to the silence surrounding him. The phone beside the card was dead silent, no calls, no texts, no one remembered. It wasn't the first time Frank had felt invisible, but today the loneliness seemed heavier, more crushing. His hand trembled as he reached for the old tablet he kept on the counter, dusty and nearly forgotten. Swiping the screen, he found himself scrolling aimlessly through videos until an unexpected clip started playing on its own. Elon Musk appeared on the screen, his voice calm but firm. "Some people live 80 years. Others live the same year 80 times. Don't confuse safety with living." The words hit Frank like a bolt of lightning. He lowered the tablet and looked around the room, noticing the faded wallpaper, the stacks of unopened mail, the clock ticking steadily toward another night swallowed by silence. He wondered, was this really what life had come to? To fading away quietly, unseen and unheard? The storm outside seemed to echo the turmoil in his chest. Was he just existing, or was there still something more? The question burned brighter than the flickering kitchen light. He recalled the old days, the hum of electricity and life coursing through his fingers when he fixed radios and wires in his workshop, the laughter of Margie as she called him, the wizard, the smell of oil and metal that was once as familiar as breathing. Could that man, young, confident, full of purpose, still live inside him? Frank reached out and pressed pause on the Elon video, but the words lingered. Don't confuse safety with living. What had he been so afraid of? Was he too old to change? Or was he just waiting for permission to matter again? His mind drifted to his daughter, Lena, busy with her own life, her calls growing fewer, her visits almost non-existent. He thought of his heart, fragile but still beating, the doctor's warning echoing in his ears, "You need to slow down, Frank. Your heart's not what it used to be." But what if slowing down wasn't the answer? What if the moment to start again was right now? The idea was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. He leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him, and for the first time in months, felt a flicker of something resembling hope. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The voice from the video seemed to whisper directly to him, this story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? He smiled faintly, imagining others like him, watching, waiting, wondering. Maybe this was their moment too. The storm outside softened into a gentle rain. Frank's fingers curled around the tablet, ready to listen, to learn, and maybe to try. He was tired of fading away. Maybe it was time to live again. Frank Delaney's life before that stormy afternoon was a quiet story of faded dreams and lingering regrets wrapped in the familiar creak of his small Indiana home. He had spent decades as an electrician, a man whose hands knew the language of wires and circuits like a pianist's knew the keys. Back then, he was the go-to guy for fixing broken things, not just in his neighborhood but in the little town that felt like the center of his universe. The garage behind his house was a shrine to his past self, workbenches littered with screwdrivers, coils of wire, half-finished radios, and clocks he'd promised himself he'd fix someday. Each piece was a memory, a small monument to the man he once was, the man Margie saw every day before cancer took her away 10 years ago. Margie had been the light in his world, the one who believed in his dreams when he doubted them. She used to say, "You were born to make things, Frank. Not just fix them." Those words haunted him, echoing like a refrain he had tried to forget. The house had once been filled with laughter, with the scent of Margie's baking and the sound of Lena's voice as a child playing hide and seek in the yard. Now the walls seemed to listen quietly to his solitary footsteps, the creaks and groans a reminder that time had moved on while he remained still. Frank's relationship with his daughter Lena was fractured like a broken circuit. After Margie's passing, Lena had retreated into her own world, distant and guarded. Phone calls became fewer, visits became rarer, and the silence between them grew wider each year. Frank often thought about what he had lost, what opportunities he had missed to mend the growing gap between them. The nights were the hardest. He would sit in his worn armchair by the window, looking out at the empty streetlights, feeling the weight of years pressing down like an invisible shroud. He remembered the days when he had dreams that stretched beyond the limits of his town. He had wanted to build something meaningful, something lasting, not just to fix but to create. But life had pulled him in other directions. Bills to pay, a family to raise, a wife to care for during her long illness. Now, with his body less reliable and his spirit dimmed, those dreams felt like echoes from another lifetime. There was a moment, years ago, when Frank had started building a ham radio, a project he hoped to share with Margie and Lena, a bridge to the world beyond their small town. But life had interrupted, Margie fell ill, and the radio sat half-finished on the bench, gathering dust as the days slipped away. That half-built radio had become a symbol for Frank, a reminder of what might have been and what he had left undone. Yet, despite the weight of loss and regret, Frank's mind was not yet ready to accept defeat. Something deep inside him still flickered, like the faint glow of a filament in a dark room. He had always been a man of action, a man who fixed what was broken, who solved problems with his hands. But now the challenge was not a faulty wire or a broken circuit, it was the broken connection with himself, with his purpose, with a future he no longer dared to imagine. His days blurred into a routine of quiet chores, small walks to the corner store, and evenings spent watching old reruns on television, the noise filling the emptiness but never quite reaching his heart. The town itself seemed to mirror his state, a place caught between its fading past and an uncertain future. Shops closed earlier, neighbors grew quieter, and the younger generation left for cities promising excitement and innovation. Frank's neighborhood felt like a relic, a place left behind by time and progress. And yet, the world was changing faster than ever, buzzing with technology and new ideas, a world where a man like Frank felt increasingly irrelevant. He thought about Elon Musk only occasionally, usually when he saw a headline about rockets launching or electric cars speeding past. Elon was a man who seemed to defy limits, a restless force always pushing boundaries. Frank admired that spirit from afar but told himself it was for people with youth and energy, not for someone whose knees ached and whose days were counted. But deep down, a quiet question nagged at him: what if he was wrong? What if age wasn't the end of the story but the beginning of a new chapter? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Frank wandered into his garage and stood staring at the cluttered workbench. His fingers brushed against the dusty radio, and for the first time in years, he felt a spark of longing, a desire to touch something that connected him to the man he used to be, and could still become. The garage smelled of oil and metal, faintly of sawdust and memories. It was a place where time felt suspended, where the past and future met. He closed his eyes and remembered Margie's smile, Lena's laughter, the promise of unfinished projects waiting to be born again. But alongside that yearning was fear. Fear of failure, of being too old, of being forgotten. The voice of the doctor warning him to slow down echoed in his mind, mingling with the neighbor's advice to take it easy, to accept the inevitable. Frank shook his head. He wasn't ready to fade away. Not yet. He wondered what Elon Musk would say if he could hear his doubts. Probably something about risk and reward, about the cost of playing it safe. He knew that Musk's life was about pushing boundaries, about believing in the impossible. Could that belief live in him too? Frank spent that evening scrolling through news clips and interviews of Elon Musk, searching for something, anything, that would speak to the man trapped inside his aging body. He stumbled upon a line that cut through the fog of his uncertainty: when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. The words echoed inside him, awakening a restless energy he hadn't felt in years. He sat back and stared at the half-finished radio on his bench. Maybe this was the moment to begin again, not despite his age but because of it. Maybe the real test was to defy expectations, not just of others, but of himself. Frank didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. That night, as he lay in bed, the storm passed and the moonlight spilled softly through the window. The house, once heavy with silence, seemed to breathe with possibility. Frank closed his eyes and whispered to the darkness, "Maybe I'm not done yet." The life before the shift was a life lived quietly, in the shadow of dreams deferred, but the spark was there, waiting. All it needed was a single flame to ignite the fire again. And that flame was about to come from the most unexpected place, an electric spark from a man who built rockets, who believed that the only limits that mattered were the ones we accepted. Frank's story was far from over. It was just beginning. Frank woke early the next morning to the dull ache in his chest reminding him of the doctor's words. "You need to slow down," Dr. Harris had said just last week during his annual checkup, peering over his glasses with the kind of concern that felt more like a warning. "Your heart's not what it used to be. No more late nights in the garage, Frank." The phrase echoed in his mind as he made coffee in the quiet kitchen, the familiar bitterness a small comfort. His hands, once steady and sure, trembled slightly as he poured the steaming liquid into a chipped mug. Outside, the neighborhood was waking slowly, neighbors chatting over fences, kids riding bikes with laughter trailing behind them like a ribbon. Frank watched from his window, feeling like an outsider in a world that kept moving without him. Later, as he sat reading the newspaper, a flyer slipped out, advertising a local senior center's slow and steady exercise class. The words hit him differently today. Was that what was left for him? To slow down and fade into the background, a cautionary tale for younger generations? A knock on the door startled him. It was Mrs. Peterson from next door, carrying a freshly baked pie wrapped in wax paper. "Just thought you might like a slice," she said, her smile warm but tired. "You've been keeping to yourself more these days." Frank smiled politely, nodding. "Thanks, Helen. Just taking it easy." She glanced at the worn-down house and the overgrown lawn and said softly, "We all get older, Frank. It's part of life. You've had a good run." Her words, meant kindly, felt like a dismissal, a subtle push to step aside and let the younger folks take over. Frank nodded but felt the sting of being written off, the invisible weight of being considered a relic. After she left, he sat back down, staring at the quiet kitchen walls, the faded wallpaper peeling at the edges like the years that were slipping away. That afternoon, Frank decided to take a slow walk to the corner store. The neighborhood felt both familiar and foreign. Houses wore new coats of paint, cars newer and shinier than the old pickups he once drove. At the store, the cashier barely looked up, distracted by her phone. No greetings, no smiles. The world had changed. People were busier, faster, younger. Frank felt like a ghost moving through a world that no longer noticed him. On his way back, he stopped at the small park where he used to play catch with Lena when she was little. The swing swayed gently in the breeze, empty now. He sat on a bench, the wooden slats weathered and rough against his hands. For a moment, he closed his eyes and remembered the sound of Lena's laughter, Margie's voice calling them home for dinner. The memories were bittersweet, a reminder of love and loss. The silence pressed down on him. Was this what aging meant? To be forgotten, to become background noise in the lives of those you once held dear? That night, Frank flipped through channels, landing on a late-night talk show featuring Elon Musk. The segment was short but electrifying. Elon spoke about failure and risk, about the importance of daring to challenge the status quo. "The biggest risk is not taking any risk," Elon said. "In a world that's changing quickly, the only strategy that is guaranteed to fail is not taking risks." Frank felt a shiver run down his spine. His mind raced with questions. Was he too old to take risks? Was there still time to rewrite his story? The room felt colder than before, but inside, something stirred, a flicker of defiance against the quiet resignation that had settled over him. Over the next few days, Frank wrestled with his doubts. The doctor's advice, the neighbor's gentle nudges, the absence of his daughter's calls, all pulled him toward retreat. But Elon's words tugged him in the opposite direction, a silent challenge to break free from the weight of years and expectations. He found himself staring at the dusty radio in the garage again, its wires tangled and forgotten. Could he really try to finish it? Would it matter? One evening, after a particularly lonely day, Frank found himself reaching for the tablet. He searched for more Elon interviews, hungry for inspiration, desperate for a spark. Elon's voice became a lifeline in the silence. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. The phrase repeated itself like a mantra, pushing back the doubts, the fears, the invisible walls closing in around him. Frank knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. His body wasn't what it used to be. The world was moving fast and not always welcoming. But for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of courage. The sound of silence that had filled his days was beginning to crack. Maybe he could reclaim a piece of himself. Maybe the story wasn't over. And maybe, just maybe, Elon Musk was right. The only failure was in never trying at all. The morning after his restless night, Frank woke with a lingering sense of unease mixed with a strange new energy. The ache in his chest still whispered caution, but his mind was spinning with possibilities. He knew he couldn't stay trapped in that cycle of silence and regret any longer. The question wasn't just, can I change, but where do I even start? He shuffled into the garage, the floor cool beneath his worn slippers, and approached the workbench where the half-built ham radio waited patiently like an old friend. Dust motes danced in the sunlight filtering through the dusty windows. Frank's fingers hovered over the tangled wires, the tiny screws, the faded blueprints he'd drawn decades ago. His hands trembled, not just with age but with the fear of failure. What if he couldn't finish it? What if he wasn't the man he remembered? But then he heard that voice again, Elon Musk's words echoing in his mind, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Important. That word hit him harder than he expected. This project wasn't just about radios or electronics. It was about reclaiming a part of himself he thought lost forever. Slowly, carefully, he set to work. The garage smelled of old wood, metal, and a hint of motor oil, a scent that brought a rush of memories. His hands, though shaky, remembered the rhythm of twisting wires and tightening screws. Hours passed, the world outside fading into the background as Frank lost himself in the process. It was hard, frustrating, but also exhilarating. For the first time in years, he felt alive. Each connection made, each circuit tested, was a small victory against the creeping numbness of age. Days turned into a week. Frank began walking a little longer each morning, the stiff joints loosening as he pushed his body gently beyond what it thought possible. The neighbors noticed the change too. Mrs. Peterson stopped by more often, bringing slices of pie and offering encouragement instead of pity. Lena called, tentatively at first, after hearing from a mutual friend that her father was doing something interesting again. Their conversation was awkward but warm, like a fragile bridge being built across years of silence. Frank shared bits about the radio project, the small steps he was taking to get back to himself. Elon Musk's example was no longer a distant headline but a living inspiration, a reminder that the spirit of innovation and courage didn't retire with age. One afternoon, Frank posted a short video on a social media platform, something his granddaughter had helped him set up. In it, he spoke candidly about his journey, his doubts, and his small victories. The response surprised him. Comments from strangers his age, from younger people who saw hope in his story, began to pour in. "You're an inspiration. It's never too late to start. Thank you for reminding me that we still matter." The encouragement fueled Frank's determination. The project in the garage became more than a hobby, it was a mission. The radio was more than a machine, it was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the idea that life after 60 wasn't a downhill slide but a climb with new heights to reach. One evening, as Frank tightened the last screw, a surge of emotion overwhelmed him. The radio sat complete, its circuits alive with the faint hum of power. He held the device in his hands, feeling a connection that transcended time. The unfinished past and the uncertain future merged into a moment of triumph. It wasn't just a machine, it was his declaration that he wasn't done yet. That night, he sat by the window, listening to the crackling voices coming through the radio waves, strangers from distant places, stories carried across invisible threads of energy. He smiled, feeling a profound sense of belonging. The inner war that had raged so fiercely was beginning to calm. Frank realized the most important change wasn't the radio or the walks or the calls. It was his belief in himself. The belief that age was not a cage but a key to unlock new doors, new dreams, new life. Elon Musk's radical thinking, his fearless rebellion against limits, had sparked a fire in Frank's heart. And that fire was spreading. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and moments of doubt. But Frank was no longer afraid. He had made the choice. The one thing he changed was himself. And with that, everything else began to change too. Frank sat in his creaky armchair, the dim light casting long shadows across the room that had seen so many years of quiet living. The ham radio hummed softly on the table before him, a small beacon of static and possibility. Tonight was different. Tonight, something in the air felt charged, electric, almost alive. Earlier that day, Frank's phone had buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from Lena. Her words were simple but powerful. "Dad, I saw your video. Proud of you." The message hit him harder than any spark from the radio. Years of silence and distance seemed to dissolve in an instant. Frank's eyes filled with tears, a mix of relief and disbelief. Could a message so brief carry the weight of healing an entire lifetime? The radio crackled again, faint voices reaching out across the waves, some familiar, some strangers, all connected by invisible threads of sound and hope. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, a reminder of time passing but also of time regained. It was the moment Frank realized that breaking through wasn't just about finishing a project or getting a call from his daughter. It was about breaking through the walls he had built around himself, the fears and doubts that had kept him silent for too long. In the weeks leading up to this night, Frank's life had begun to shift in ways he never imagined possible. The social media posts he shared chronicling his journey, from hesitant first steps to small daily victories, had begun to resonate with a growing audience. Strangers reached out with words of encouragement and shared stories of their own struggles with aging, loneliness, and the search for purpose. Frank had become part of a community that thrived on hope and resilience, a testament to the fact that no one was truly alone. But the most profound breakthrough was the fragile reconnection with Lena. Their conversations remained cautious, peppered with awkward silences and tentative smiles, but they were real. For the first time in years, Frank felt seen, not as a relic of the past, but as a man still living, still growing, still capable of change. One afternoon, Lena surprised him with a visit. She arrived at the house holding a box of his favorite childhood snacks, a nostalgic gesture that brought a warmth neither of them dared to voice. They sat together in the living room, the air thick with unsaid words, until Frank finally shared the story behind the ham radio, the unfinished project, the promise to Margie, the fear and hope intertwined in every wire and circuit. Lena listened quietly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and regret. "I never realized how much you held back, Dad," she said softly. "I guess I was too afraid to see you struggle." Frank nodded, understanding that the past could not be undone, but the future was still unwritten. Their conversation marked a turning point, a crack in the silence that had defined their relationship. As the days passed, Frank found himself more energized than ever. The radio became a symbol not just of his own transformation but of the potential within all of them to rewrite their stories. He began sharing tutorials and reflections online, offering encouragement to others who felt trapped by age or circumstance. Elon Musk's influence lingered like a guiding light, not as a savior, but as a spark igniting a fire within each person brave enough to take the first step. One evening, Frank received an invitation to speak at a local community event celebrating innovation and resilience in later life. The invitation was unexpected, a recognition of his journey and the impact he was beginning to make. Standing in front of the crowd, many faces familiar and some new, Frank spoke from the heart. He shared his story of loss and loneliness, fear and hope, the moment he chose to stop fading and start living again. His voice trembled at times, but the strength beneath it was undeniable. "I thought it was the end," he told them, "but it was just a new beginning. I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." The applause that followed was not just for Frank but for everyone in the room who had ever felt forgotten or powerless. It was a collective affirmation that life after 60 was not a decline but an opportunity, an invitation to dream, to create, to connect. That night, as Frank returned home, the streets quiet and the stars shining overhead, he felt a profound sense of peace. The journey was far from over. There would be setbacks, doubts, and challenges ahead. But he had broken through the most formidable barrier, the one within himself. The sound of the radio's crackle filled the room, a reminder that the world was full of possibilities waiting to be heard. Frank smiled, knowing that the moment it all changed was not a single event but a series of small, brave choices. And in choosing to live fully, he had found the real beginning he never thought possible. The morning light spilled softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow over Frank's living room, now filled with small signs of renewal. The ham radio sat proudly on the shelf, a symbol not just of a completed project but of a life reclaimed. The air carried the faint scent of fresh coffee and old books, a comforting blend that had become the soundtrack of Frank's new days. He sat quietly, hands wrapped around his favorite mug, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. It had been a long road, winding through doubt, loneliness, and the heavy weight of years. But now, in this quiet moment, Frank felt a peace that was hard-earned and deeply deserved. He thought about the words he had shared at the community event, the crowd's warm applause, and the faces of people who saw their own struggles reflected in his story. For so long, he had believed his life was a closing chapter, a fading echo in a world that prized youth and speed. Yet here he was, standing at the threshold of something new, a legacy not written in grand gestures or fame, but in small acts of courage and connection. The phone rang, breaking his reverie. It was Lena, her voice bright and hopeful. They talked about everyday things, plans to visit, memories of Margie, shared dreams for the future. Each conversation chipped away at the distance that had once felt insurmountable. Frank realized that legacy wasn't about what he left behind but what he continued to build with the people he loved. Later, he checked his social media messages. A flood of comments and messages greeted him, thank yous from strangers inspired by his journey, stories of their own transformations, and even invitations to speak at other gatherings. The community he had found online was growing, a testament to the power of shared hope. Frank smiled, remembering Elon Musk's words about taking risks and daring to challenge limits. It wasn't about trying to be someone else, it was about becoming the best version of himself, no matter the age or the obstacles. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed softly with life, children playing, neighbors chatting, the gentle hum of everyday moments. Frank stepped onto the porch, feeling the sun warm his face and the breeze ruffle his hair. He thought about Margie, her laughter echoing in his heart, and the promise he had made to live fully again. This was his new legacy, not a monument or a trophy but the quiet strength to keep moving forward, to keep believing in the possibility of change. As he watched the world around him, Frank understood that aging wasn't the end of the road but a new beginning, a chance to rewrite the story with purpose and passion. He wasn't too old. He was just getting started. Frank woke with a strange sense of anticipation buzzing under his skin, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. The ham radio, once just a dusty project gathering cobwebs, now sat quietly in the corner, a faithful companion in his transformed life. Today wasn't about tinkering or quiet reflection. Today, Frank decided, was about action. The small victories and personal breakthroughs were vital, but he sensed a larger purpose stirring within him. Sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his morning coffee, Frank scrolled through messages from the online community he'd helped build. Stories poured in. People in their 60s and 70s starting new ventures, rekindling old dreams, or simply refusing to be sidelined by the passage of time. Each message was a thread weaving together a tapestry of resilience and hope. Inspired, Frank drafted an idea: what if he could create a local group, a gathering place for seniors who wanted to challenge the idea that aging meant decline? What if they could share skills, stories, and dreams, supporting each other to keep growing? The thought sparked a fire. He reached out to the community center, proposing a weekly meetup. He called it the Second Act Society, a nod to the idea that life's richest chapters often come later. The response was encouraging. The center director was enthusiastic, eager to host a program that celebrated vitality at any age. Flyers went up around town, and Frank spread the word in his social circles. The first meeting was modest, half a dozen people gathering in a sunlit room, uncertain but curious. Among them was Margaret, a retired schoolteacher who had recently lost her husband, and James, a former mechanic eager to learn digital skills. There was Ruth, who brought homemade cookies and stories from a lifetime of community activism, and Carl, a Vietnam veteran with a passion for woodworking. Frank opened the session with a story from his own journey, the moment he realized age was not a sentence but a new beginning, fueled by the fearless mindset of Elon Musk. He talked about the power of small steps and bold choices. The group listened, eyes bright with recognition and hope. Soon, conversation sparked, about fears, dreams, challenges, and the stubborn refusal to be invisible. They shared plans to start projects, volunteer, learn, and teach. Frank realized that this was more than a club, it was a movement, a collective rebellion against the notion that life slows to a crawl after a certain age. Weeks passed, and the Second Act Society grew. Meetings buzzed with energy, laughter, and a renewed sense of purpose. Members exchanged skills, from gardening tips to tech tutorials, and supported each other through health scares and family dramas. Frank found himself invigorated by the connections and the feeling of being part of something bigger than himself. One afternoon, as the group gathered in the park for a picnic, Frank noticed a young reporter from the local newspaper taking notes. She approached him afterward, intrigued by the story of seniors rewriting their narratives. The resulting article brought wider attention to the group, inspiring others to start similar gatherings in nearby towns. Frank was invited to speak at community centers, libraries, and even a regional conference on aging and innovation. Each opportunity reinforced the truth he'd come to embrace: age was not a barrier but a bridge, to new experiences, new friendships, and new purpose. The world was still full of possibilities, and Frank was determined to seize them. His relationship with Lena blossomed too. She joined the group occasionally, seeing firsthand the vitality and courage of the people her father had inspired. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond apologies and regrets to shared dreams for the future. Together, they talked about creating a digital archive of stories from the Second Act Society, preserving the voices and wisdom of a generation too often overlooked. Late one evening, Frank found himself reading Elon Musk's interviews once more, feeling the electric charge of radical thinking and relentless curiosity. Elon's fearlessness was not about denying age or limitation but about embracing challenge with open arms, no matter what life throws at you. Frank smiled, knowing that he, too, had found that fire within. His new mission was clear: to keep pushing boundaries, to keep inspiring others, and to live a life that proved the greatest adventures often come later than we expect. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Frank welcomed it with open eyes and a brave heart. Aging wasn't an ending, it was a new mission waiting to be fulfilled. Despite the bright new mission and growing community, Frank felt a familiar heaviness creeping back in during quiet moments. The excitement of change did not erase the shadows lurking in the corners of his mind, memories of loss, regrets, and fears that had shaped his life for decades. One rainy afternoon, as the gray skies mirrored his mood, Frank sat alone in his study, surrounded by letters from friends and new acquaintances but feeling curiously isolated. The vibrant energy of the Second Act Society seemed distant now, replaced by a gnawing question: was this really enough? Could he truly outrun the ghosts of the past? He thought about Margie, her laughter and love still echoing faintly in his heart but overshadowed by the silence that followed her passing. The years of estrangement with Lena weighed heavily, despite their recent reconnections. And beneath it all was the constant reminder from doctors, friends, and society that he should slow down, accept limitations, and prepare for the inevitable decline. The radio sat quietly on the shelf, no longer humming with the same life it had a few weeks ago. Frank reached for it, fingers trembling as he switched it on, the crackling static filling the room. Among the noise, a voice emerged, young, confident, challenging. It was a podcast featuring Elon Musk, discussing the power of embracing failure and fear. "The biggest risk is not taking any risk," Elon said. "In a world that changes so quickly, the only strategy guaranteed to fail is not taking risks." The words pierced Frank's solitude. He realized that facing shadows was part of the journey, not a detour from it. To move forward, he had to confront the fears and doubts that threatened to hold him back. That evening, Frank called Lena. They spoke longer than usual, peeling back layers of misunderstanding and pain. Lena shared her own fears, of losing her father, of feeling inadequate after years of silence. Frank admitted his vulnerability, the loneliness he had hidden beneath strength. Their honesty created a fragile bridge of trust, a foundation for healing that neither had dared to build before. The next day, Frank wrote in his journal, a practice he'd started to process the flood of emotions. He wrote about fear, failure, and the courage it took to keep going. "I am not just the sum of my regrets," he penned. "I am the possibility of what comes next." With renewed resolve, Frank reached out to a local counselor specializing in grief and aging. The sessions were difficult but necessary, peeling back the layers of grief that had settled like dust over his spirit. He learned to sit with discomfort, to acknowledge pain without letting it define him. Slowly, the shadows lost some of their power. At the Second Act Society meeting that week, Frank shared his experience with the group. He spoke about the importance of vulnerability, the courage it took to face one's own darkness, and the strength that comes from connection and support. The group responded with stories of their own struggles, losses of spouses, estranged children, health scares, and battles with loneliness. Together, they created a space where shadows could be named and faced without shame. The community deepened, becoming more than just a gathering, it was a lifeline. One afternoon, Frank took a long walk through the neighborhood park, the crunch of autumn leaves beneath his feet grounding him in the present. He reflected on the journey so far. The moments of breakthrough and the moments of doubt. Elon Musk's fearless mindset had been the spark, but the true transformation came from learning to live fully with imperfection and fear. Frank understood now that aging wasn't about avoiding shadows but dancing with them, letting them teach instead of imprison. That evening, as he tuned the radio once more, he caught a distant transmission, a conversation about resilience, hope, and the power of second chances. The voices were faint but clear enough to remind him that life's static always carried signals worth listening to. Frank smiled, feeling lighter, stronger. The shadows hadn't disappeared, but they no longer controlled him. He was learning to live with courage, compassion, and an open heart, ready for whatever the next chapter would bring. One crisp morning, Frank received a phone call that felt like a sudden gust of fresh air blowing through the quiet corners of his life. It was from the local public library's director, Mrs. Green, inviting him to participate in an upcoming community innovation festival. The invitation wasn't just to attend, it was to speak. Frank sat back in his chair, the unexpected news stirring a mix of excitement and nerves. Speaking in front of a crowd wasn't new, but this festival promised a broader audience than he was used to, a chance to share his story beyond the familiar faces of the Second Act Society. For the first time in a long time, Frank felt the familiar thrill of a challenge that could push him beyond his comfort zone. Over the next few days, Frank threw himself into preparation. He revisited his journey from isolation to connection, from fear to hope, shaping his message into something powerful and authentic. He wanted to inspire others who felt lost or forgotten, those wrestling with the heavy weight of aging in doubt. His talk would be about embracing change, taking risks, and finding purpose at any age, lessons he had learned firsthand, with a quiet nod to the fearless mindset embodied by Elon Musk. On the day of the festival, the library's community hall buzzed with energy. Tables displayed innovative projects from local youth, artists, and entrepreneurs. The air was filled with laughter, conversation, and the hum of possibility. Frank felt a surge of gratitude for being part of such a vibrant tapestry. When it was his turn, he stepped onto the modest stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding. Taking a deep breath, Frank began. He spoke with the honesty and vulnerability that had become his hallmark, sharing the story of a man who once thought his best days were behind him but discovered instead that the journey was far from over. He talked about loneliness, loss, and the quiet battles fought in the shadows, but also about the power of community, courage, and small steps that lead to big change. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. When Frank finished, the applause was warm and heartfelt. Several attendees approached him afterward, sharing their own stories and thanking him for his courage. Among them was a representative from a regional nonprofit focused on senior engagement and innovation. She invited Frank to join their advisory board, an opportunity to influence programs and policies that could improve the lives of thousands of older adults. The offer took Frank by surprise. It was a chance to make a tangible difference beyond his own community, to use his voice and experience on a larger stage. He accepted with humility and determination. Over the following weeks, Frank's involvement with the nonprofit opened doors to new collaborations and ideas. He worked with professionals and volunteers passionate about changing the narrative around aging, advocating for programs that encouraged lifelong learning, intergenerational connection, and meaningful contribution. At the same time, the Second Act Society continued to thrive, its members inspired by Frank's expanding role and renewed sense of purpose. Lena, too, grew more involved, bringing her skills as a writer and digital creator to document the group's stories and amplify their impact online. The synergy between local grassroots efforts and larger organizational support gave Frank hope that real change was possible. One afternoon, while reviewing plans for a new initiative aimed at combating senior isolation through technology, Frank reflected on how far he had come. The man who once felt invisible and powerless was now an agent of transformation, proving that age was not a limit but a launching pad. In quiet moments, he still thought about Elon Musk's fearless words, the refusal to accept boundaries and the drive to innovate at any stage of life. Those lessons had sparked the fire, but it was Frank's own courage and the support of a growing community that kept it burning bright. As the sun set, casting golden light over the town, Frank sat on his porch with Lena beside him. They talked about the future, plans to expand the Second Act Society, ideas for workshops and storytelling projects, and dreams of inspiring others across the country. Frank realized that this chapter of his life was no longer defined by what he had lost but by what he was building. The surprise opportunity had become a gateway to purpose, connection, and legacy. And with every step forward, Frank knew he was rewriting the story of what it meant to grow older. Not as an ending, but as a bold new beginning. The cool breeze of early spring stirred the branches outside Frank's window as he sat at his desk, staring at the letter in his hands. It was an invitation, an unexpected offer to join a national panel on aging and innovation. The letter promised an opportunity to speak alongside experts, leaders, and visionaries, to influence policies shaping the future for millions of seniors. Frank's heart raced. Part of him felt honored, ready to embrace the challenge. Another part trembled with uncertainty, whispering doubts that had shadowed him for decades. Was he truly qualified? Did he belong in those circles? Could he still make a difference beyond his small town? The moment felt like a crossroads, a choice between stepping into a larger arena or retreating to the comfort of familiar spaces. Overwhelmed but determined, Frank reached out to Lena. They talked late into the night about fears, hopes, and the weight of expectations. Lena's voice was steady and encouraging, reminding him that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the willingness to move forward despite it. She reminded him of the lessons from Elon Musk's mindset, to embrace risk, to push boundaries, and to believe in the possibility of change at any stage. The next morning, Frank took a long walk through the park, feeling the crunch of leaves beneath his feet grounding him in the present. He thought about the years lost to resignation and doubt, the moments he had almost given up. And he thought about the future, a future he still had the power to shape. Returning home, Frank made his decision. He would accept the invitation, not as a token or a curiosity, but as a voice for those who had been overlooked and underestimated. Preparation began in earnest. Frank immersed himself in research, connecting with fellow panelists, and refining his message. He wanted to speak not only from experience but with clarity and conviction, to challenge outdated assumptions about aging and ignite new conversations about possibility and purpose. The day of the panel arrived, and Frank found himself seated among scholars, activists, and innovators. The room was filled with energy and expectation. When it was his turn, Frank spoke from the heart, sharing his journey from isolation to engagement, from fear to hope. He spoke about the power of community, the importance of intergenerational connection, and the need for society to recognize the value and potential of older adults. He quoted Elon Musk, reminding the audience that innovation wasn't the exclusive domain of the young but a lifelong pursuit fueled by curiosity and courage. The response was warm and thoughtful, sparking lively discussion and invitations to collaborate. Frank felt a surge of pride and purpose, knowing his voice had reached beyond the familiar to inspire change on a broader scale. Yet, amidst the success, Frank faced challenges closer to home. His health, while stable, required more attention. The demands of travel and public speaking sometimes left him exhausted. Family tensions surfaced as Lena struggled with balancing her own life and the renewed closeness to her father. Frank realized that growth and change weren't linear but a series of complex choices, each requiring balance and resilience. One evening, he reflected on the words Elon had shared in a rare interview: "Focus is the key, but so is knowing when to pivot." Frank understood now that his mission required not just passion but wisdom, to know when to push forward and when to rest, when to open new doors and when to nurture what already existed. In the weeks that followed, Frank and Lena worked together to create a sustainable plan for his involvement. They enlisted volunteers to support the Second Act Society, delegated responsibilities, and carved out time for rest and reflection. Frank embraced new routines: morning walks to clear his mind, quiet evenings for reading and journaling, and moments of gratitude for the journey so far. The crossroads had not disappeared, but Frank faced them with renewed clarity and strength. He was no longer the man defined by fear and doubt but a leader navigating the complexities of change with courage and grace. The choices he made would shape not only his legacy but the lives of those inspired to believe that aging was not an end but a powerful new beginning. The hum of Frank's newly installed ham radio filled the quiet room with gentle static, a comforting reminder of both his past passions and his current journey. It was late evening, and outside the window, the stars blinked in a clear sky, timeless witnesses to the transformations unfolding within Frank's life. Just as he adjusted the frequency, a crackling voice emerged, a fellow ham enthusiast reaching out from across the country. The connection was spontaneous, unplanned, yet it instantly sparked a sense of camaraderie and curiosity. "Hello, this is KC7 Blue. You there?" The voice was warm, steady, and carried the faint echo of miles traveled. Frank smiled, responding in kind, the years melting away in the shared language of signals and codes. This unexpected connection reminded Frank that even in a world increasingly driven by technology and fast-paced change, authentic human connection remained at the heart of transformation. Over the next few weeks, Frank's late-night radio conversations grew into a small but meaningful network of like-minded individuals, seniors, retired professionals, and curious young people, all eager to share stories, exchange ideas, and support one another's growth. Among these new friends was Evelyn, a retired engineer from Oregon who, like Frank, had rediscovered her sense of purpose through technology and community engagement. Their conversations ranged from technical troubleshooting to deep reflections on aging, loss, and resilience. Evelyn shared how she had started a local maker space for seniors, encouraging hands-on creativity and intergenerational collaboration. Inspired, Frank saw an opportunity to bring similar energy to his town. He proposed a partnership between the Second Act Society and Evelyn's Maker Space, envisioning workshops where seniors could learn new skills, build projects, and share knowledge with younger generations. The idea sparked enthusiasm both locally and online, attracting volunteers and small grants to support the initiative. As the project took shape, Frank found himself energized by the creativity and collaboration buzzing through the workshops. The room filled with laughter and concentration as participants soldered circuits, crafted wooden toys, and programmed simple robots. The intergenerational aspect was particularly powerful. Teens and young adults brought fresh perspectives, while seniors offered patience, wisdom, and encouragement. One afternoon, Lena joined a session, capturing moments on her camera and interviewing participants for a digital storytelling project. The stories revealed a shared human experience, of curiosity, perseverance, and the refusal to be defined by age or circumstance. The success of the maker space reinforced a growing realization for Frank: transformation wasn't just personal but deeply communal. The bonds forged across generations and backgrounds created a vibrant ecosystem of support and possibility. Yet amidst this flourishing, Frank faced moments of doubt. The physical toll of his commitments was undeniable. Some mornings, aches reminded him of his age, and evenings brought fatigue that no amount of coffee could erase. He wrestled with balancing ambition and self-care, remembering the lessons from his counseling sessions and the wisdom of Elon Musk's focus on sustainable innovation. One evening, after a particularly demanding day, Frank sat quietly with Lena on the porch. They talked about boundaries, priorities, and the importance of listening to one's body and spirit. Lena shared her concerns gently, encouraging Frank to slow down when needed and to celebrate progress rather than perfection. Their conversation deepened their bond, reinforcing that transformation was not a solitary climb but a shared journey. In the months that followed, Frank integrated rest and reflection into his routine. He continued to lead with passion but allowed space for healing and renewal. The maker space thrived as a community hub, a testament to the power of unexpected connections and collaborative spirit. Frank's radio network expanded as well, a constellation of voices spanning states and backgrounds, united by curiosity and courage. Late one night, as he tuned into a distant station, Frank reflected on how much his life had changed since the days of isolation and doubt. He thought about Elon Musk's relentless drive and refusal to accept limits, realizing that those qualities were not about youth or genius alone but about the courage to keep reaching, learning, and connecting. Frank felt grateful, for the unexpected connections that had reignited his purpose, for the community that had embraced him, and for the new chapter unfolding with each shared story and crafted project. Aging was no longer a silent retreat but a vibrant dance, a symphony of voices weaving together strength, wisdom, and hope. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Just when Frank felt the momentum of his life shifting into a powerful new rhythm, an unwelcome visitor crept back into his mind: doubt. It arrived like a shadow at dusk, subtle at first, then growing heavier with each passing day. Despite the vibrant connections, the growing community projects, and the recognition he was receiving, Frank found himself questioning the meaning of it all. One gray morning, sitting alone with his coffee, the familiar ache in his knees reminded him of the limits aging had imposed. He gazed out the window at the brisk wind tossing the bare branches and wondered if his efforts were merely a fleeting spark in a vast darkness. Had he really changed anything? Was he fooling himself into thinking that at 68, he could rewrite his story? The whispers of doubt grew louder when a news article circulated in the local paper questioning the impact of senior activism. The piece painted older adults as nostalgic, resistant to change, or clinging to outdated ideas. The subtle sting of ageism cut deeper than Frank expected, stirring old insecurities he thought he had left behind. At the Second Act Society meeting that week, the topic came up unbidden. Members shared their own experiences of being dismissed or overlooked because of their age. The room filled with a mixture of frustration and sadness, a collective recognition of the cultural barriers still in place. Frank listened, feeling the weight of their stories as well as his own. That night, the doubt settled firmly in his heart. He debated stepping back, retreating to the quiet life he once knew. Yet, amidst the swirling uncertainty, a familiar voice echoed in his mind, the fearless words of Elon Musk. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Frank realized that doubt was a natural part of any meaningful journey, a test rather than a stop sign. He decided to confront the fear head-on. Over the next few days, Frank wrote a blog post titled, "Facing the Doubt, Why We Keep Going." He shared his vulnerabilities openly, the fears, the setbacks, and the moments of loneliness. The post resonated deeply, sparking a flood of responses from readers who admitted to their own struggles with doubt and ageism. The exchange of stories became a source of strength, reminding Frank and his community that they were not alone in their battles. At the same time, Frank doubled down on his commitments. He worked with Lena to organize a public forum on ageism and innovation, inviting experts, activists, and everyday people to engage in honest dialogue. The event drew a diverse crowd and featured powerful testimonials, creative performances, and actionable solutions. Frank's speech that evening was raw and compelling. He spoke of his fears but also of his determination to rise above societal limitations. The applause was thunderous, a collective affirmation of resilience and hope. Yet, Frank knew the fight wasn't over. Doubt would return in waves, but each time, he was growing stronger, more equipped to meet it with courage and community. He embraced the journey's complexity, learning that transformation was as much about persistence as it was about breakthrough moments. In quiet reflection, Frank thought back to the many chapters of his life, the losses, the regrets, and the small sparks of hope that had led him here. He understood now that aging was not a simple decline but a nuanced dance of light and shadow, fear and courage, ending and new beginnings. As the stars emerged in the night sky, Frank felt a profound sense of peace. The doubt had returned, yes, but so had his resolve. With each step forward, he was writing a new story, one of strength, purpose, and unyielding hope. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains as Frank sat quietly at his kitchen table, sipping his coffee and scrolling through the latest messages on his phone. His blog post, "Facing the Doubt, Why We Keep Going," had sparked a wave of engagement far beyond what he expected. Emails, comments, and personal stories poured in from all over the country, people he had never met, reaching out with gratitude and solidarity. One message stood out, a note from a community center director in Phoenix who invited Frank to lead a workshop on aging and innovation. The invitation felt like a door opening wider than before, beckoning him into new spaces with greater influence. The workshop was scheduled for 3 weeks later, and Frank felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. Traveling out of state, speaking to strangers, sharing his story, it was another step into the unknown. Yet he remembered the journey so far, the moments when fear had nearly held him back, and he chose instead to embrace possibility. When the day arrived, Frank found himself standing before a room filled with curious faces, older adults, caregivers, local leaders, and young volunteers eager to learn. The community center buzzed with energy and anticipation. Frank began by sharing his story, the loneliness of aging, the sting of doubt, and the spark of hope that had transformed his life. He spoke about the Second Act Society, the maker space, the power of unexpected connections, and the influence of Elon Musk's mindset. He emphasized that aging was not an end but a beginning, a chance to innovate, contribute, and connect in new and meaningful ways. The room was silent, then moved to applause and open hearts. During the Q&A, participants shared their own struggles and aspirations. One woman spoke about feeling invisible after retiring, another about the fear of trying something new. Frank listened carefully, offering encouragement and practical advice. The workshop included hands-on activities inspired by the maker space model, fostering creativity and collaboration. As the day unfolded, Frank noticed a shift in the energy, a collective awakening to the possibilities that came with embracing change, no matter the age. After the workshop, the director approached Frank with an unexpected proposal. To develop a regional program that could bring these ideas to multiple communities across the Southwest. The offer was overwhelming but thrilling, a chance to amplify impact and help shape a broader movement. Frank returned home energized, inspired by the breakthrough moment that seemed to ripple outward. The weeks that followed were filled with planning, networking, and relentless dedication. Frank and Lena collaborated to create a curriculum, secure funding, and recruit passionate volunteers. The work was challenging, but every small success fueled their determination. Back home, the Second Act Society continued to flourish, and Frank's expanding role became a source of pride for the group. Yet the breakthrough was not only external. Frank felt a profound inner shift, a renewed belief in his own worth and potential. He realized that the moments of doubt were part of the process, not the end of the story. Each challenge met with courage was a step toward a fuller, richer life. Late one evening, as Frank sat alone in his study, he reflected on the journey from isolation to influence. He thought about the words that had propelled him forward, the refusal to accept limits, the embrace of radical possibility. The breakthrough moment was not a single event but a tapestry of choices, connections, and courage woven over time. Frank smiled softly, knowing that this was only the beginning of a legacy still unfolding. Just as Frank's life seemed to be bursting open with possibility, the harsh winds of resistance blew in, testing everything he had built. The first sign was a letter from the town council. They questioned the use of community center funds for the new senior innovation program Frank was helping develop. The letter was polite but firm. While we appreciate your enthusiasm, there are concerns about allocating resources to projects with uncertain outcomes, especially those targeting older adults. Frank's stomach sank. After months of tireless work, the very people who could support the change seemed skeptical, doubting the value of investing in seniors. At a Second Act Society meeting, the tension was palpable. Some members expressed frustration and fear that bureaucracy and ageism would stall their progress. Others urged caution, worried that pushing too hard might backfire. Frank felt the weight of leadership pressing down, the pressure to keep hope alive despite obstacles. One afternoon, Frank received an invitation to a public hearing about the program's funding. He prepared carefully, crafting a speech that would not only defend the initiative but challenge the narrow thinking that discounted older adults' potential. Standing before the council, Frank spoke with calm conviction. He shared stories of members who had rediscovered purpose and vitality, of partnerships that bridged generations and brought new energy to the town. He reminded the council that investing in seniors was investing in the whole community's future. The room was quiet after he finished, a few nods here and there but no immediate breakthrough. The decision was postponed, leaving the program's fate uncertain. The setback stung, but Frank refused to give in. Drawing strength from Elon Musk's tenacity, the refusal to quit in the face of doubt, Frank and Lena organized a campaign to build public support. They collected testimonials, held community forums, and launched a social media push highlighting the positive impact of their work. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Letters from grateful seniors, family members, and even young volunteers poured in, showing the program's real value. Meanwhile, Frank encountered resistance from other fronts. A close family member questioned his commitments, worried that he was overextending himself and risking his health. The reminder of his physical limits was painful, but Frank knew balance was essential. He renewed his focus on self-care while continuing to fight for the cause. One evening, as Frank and Lena reviewed their campaign strategy, they received a surprising call from a local business owner offering sponsorship and resources. The gesture was a breakthrough, proof that with persistence, skepticism could be transformed into support. The council reconvened and approved partial funding for the program, a hard-won victory. The experience taught Frank and the community that resistance was part of the journey but not an endpoint. It also deepened their resolve to challenge outdated stereotypes and prove the limitless potential of aging minds and hearts. As spring turned to summer, the Senior Innovation Program launched with renewed energy. Frank stood before a crowd gathered at the community center, watching faces bright with anticipation and hope. He knew the road ahead would still have obstacles, but he was ready, armed with courage, community, and a vision that refused to be dimmed. The sun was setting low over the small town as Frank sat on the porch, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. The day had been long but rewarding. At the community center, the Senior Innovation Program was thriving, thanks in part to the hard work of volunteers and participants who found new joy in learning, creating, and connecting. Frank thought about the journey. How far he had come from the days when loneliness and doubt ruled his life. He realized now that transformation was rarely sudden or spectacular, it was built on countless small wins that added up over time, like drops filling a reservoir. One of those wins was the success of a simple woodworking workshop. Frank had watched with quiet pride as a group of seniors carefully measured, sanded, and assembled birdhouses under the guidance of a patient volunteer. The workshop wasn't about grand achievements but about rekindling curiosity, patience, and craftsmanship, qualities that time could deepen rather than diminish. Another win was the smile of Mr. Jenkins, a retired schoolteacher who had been hesitant to join at first but now eagerly shared stories and encouraged others. His presence was a reminder that courage to try, even after decades of hesitation, could spark renewed purpose. Frank's own small win came when a young volunteer named Mia approached him, her eyes shining with excitement. She shared how the program had inspired her to pursue a career in social work, hoping to build bridges between generations. The moment crystallized for Frank the ripple effect of their efforts, that change wasn't confined to one person or one day but flowed outward in unexpected ways. Yet, amidst the celebrations, Frank remained grounded. He understood that small wins were not endpoints but stepping stones, each one requiring patience and perseverance. He remembered Elon Musk's emphasis on relentless iteration, improving, learning, and moving forward despite setbacks. This mindset helped Frank and his team adapt as they encountered challenges, limited funding, fluctuating attendance, and the occasional discouragement from community members resistant to change. Instead of giving in, they used these obstacles to refine their approach, adding new workshops, inviting guest speakers, and creating informal social gatherings to build stronger bonds. Frank also made time to celebrate these victories with his fellow participants and volunteers, knowing that recognition fueled motivation and belonging. One evening, at a modest celebration for the program's 6-month anniversary, Frank looked around at the faces glowing with pride and possibility. He felt a deep gratitude, for the courage of everyone who had taken part, for the power of community, and for the resilience of the human spirit. The journey of transformation, he realized, was a mosaic of moments, small wins woven together into a tapestry of hope and purpose. In quiet reflection that night, Frank wrote in his journal, "I used to think change had to be big and fast to matter. Now I see that steady, patient progress can reshape a life and a community." The words echoed with the wisdom he had gained, a lesson he hoped to share far beyond his town. As Frank closed his journal and looked out at the stars, he felt ready for whatever came next, confident that even the smallest step forward was a victory worth celebrating. The momentum of the Senior Innovation Program was undeniable, but just as Frank began to feel the steady rhythm of progress, a new challenge emerged, one that tested his resilience in unexpected ways. One brisk autumn morning, Frank received a phone call that shook him to the core. It was his doctor, delivering news that no one wants to hear: early-stage heart disease. The diagnosis was serious but manageable with lifestyle changes and careful monitoring. Still, it cast a shadow over Frank's burgeoning sense of purpose. Suddenly, the physical limits he had been pushing against became more real and urgent. As he sat quietly in his living room, the weight of the news settling in, Frank grappled with fear and uncertainty. What if his health declined faster than he could adapt? What if the work he had built, the connections he had forged, all had to stop? The familiar voices of doubt began whispering again, threatening to undo the progress he had made. Yet, amid the turmoil, Frank found clarity in the example of Elon Musk's relentless problem-solving mindset. Musk didn't see obstacles as dead ends but as puzzles to be solved, opportunities to innovate. Inspired, Frank resolved to approach his diagnosis not as a defeat but as a new frontier, a challenge to integrate care, caution, and courage. Over the next weeks, Frank embraced a regimen of heart-healthy habits, improved diet, gentle exercise, and regular rest. He adjusted his schedule to allow more time for recovery, enlisting Lena's help to manage tasks that required extra energy. The change wasn't easy, there were days of frustration and fatigue, but Frank's determination to keep moving forward remained steadfast. He also saw the diagnosis as a chance to deepen his message with the Second Act Society. He began hosting workshops on health, aging, and resilience, inviting medical professionals and wellness experts to share knowledge and encourage proactive care. The workshops became popular, adding a vital dimension to the community's growth. Frank's vulnerability about his health struggles resonated deeply with participants, many of whom faced their own challenges. They found comfort and strength in sharing openly, building a culture of mutual support and empowerment. Meanwhile, the regional program expanded, connecting with more towns and communities eager to embrace aging as a time of possibility. Frank's leadership was grounded not in invincibility but in authenticity, showing that strength included accepting limits while refusing to surrender dreams. One evening, after a particularly moving workshop, Frank sat quietly in his study. He reflected on the unexpected path his life had taken, from isolation to community, from fear to hope, from doubt to action. The new challenge of heart disease was daunting, but it was also a reminder of life's fragility and preciousness. In that moment, Frank made a promise to himself, to continue living boldly, embracing change, and inspiring others to do the same, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. He remembered Elon Musk's words, "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." Frank knew he was far from forced to give up. He was just beginning a new chapter, one defined not by fear, but by courage and purpose. Frank's life had become a tapestry of small victories and daunting challenges, but just when he thought he understood the rhythm, life surprised him again in the most unexpected way. It began with a phone call from his estranged daughter, Emily. They hadn't spoken in nearly 15 years, a silence born from misunderstandings, distance, and unspoken pain. Frank's heart pounded as he heard her voice, tentative but real. "Dad, I've been following what you're doing, and I'm proud of you. Can we talk?" The years of regret and longing surged forward, mingling with hope. The invitation to reconnect felt like a fragile bridge spanning a deep canyon. Over the following weeks, they spoke slowly, cautiously rebuilding trust through shared memories, honest apologies, and new stories. Emily shared her own struggles, her fears of failure, the challenges of raising a family, and the ways Frank's work had inspired her from afar. Frank listened with a mixture of sorrow and joy, realizing that healing was possible even after years of silence. Their conversations became a source of renewal for Frank, reminding him that transformation wasn't just about external accomplishments but also about mending the heart. Emily's return rekindled old dreams of family gatherings, shared meals, and simple moments of connection that had been missing for so long. Frank invited her to visit the community center, to meet the people whose lives he had touched. Emily was moved by the vibrant energy and sense of purpose that filled the room. She met Lena and the volunteers, witnessing firsthand the impact of Frank's work. Seeing her father in this light, strong and compassionate despite the challenges he faced, deepened her respect and admiration. One afternoon, Emily surprised Frank with a gift, a carefully framed photo collage capturing moments from the program, smiling faces, workshops in progress, and candid snapshots of community members creating and celebrating. "You've built something incredible," she said softly. "This is your legacy." The gesture touched Frank deeply, symbolizing the fragile but powerful reconnection between past and present. Inspired by their renewed relationship, Frank and Emily began collaborating on a new project, a digital archive and storytelling platform for seniors to share their experiences, wisdom, and dreams. The initiative combined Frank's passion for community with Emily's skills in technology and communication. Together, they envisioned a space that could amplify voices often unheard, bridging generations through shared stories. The project ignited fresh energy in Frank, blending personal healing with public impact. Late one evening, as Frank and Emily reviewed the platform's first entries, he reflected on the unexpected gift of reconciliation. Life, he realized, was full of second chances, not just for careers or dreams, but for relationships and self-forgiveness. The reunion with Emily was a living testament to the power of persistence, openness, and love to rewrite even the deepest chapters of the past. In that quiet moment, Frank felt a profound gratitude. The journey had been long and fraught with setbacks, but it was also filled with moments of grace and unexpected joy. Aging was no longer a fading light but a wellspring of possibility, connection, and renewal. And as father and daughter sat side by side, ready to write the next chapter together, Frank understood that this was the real beginning he had been waiting for. Frank felt a quiet thrill as he watched the first wave of stories pour into the digital archive he and Emily had launched. Seniors from across the region were submitting their memories, dreams, and reflections, a tapestry of lives rich with experience and hope. The platform was more than a collection of words, it was a living community, where voices once silenced by age or circumstance found strength and purpose. Each story sparked conversations, inspired connections, and invited others to share their truths. Frank noticed how the project extended beyond the digital realm. Local libraries began hosting storytelling circles, and schools invited seniors to share their histories with curious students. The ripple effect was undeniable, a spreading current of empathy and understanding that bridged generations. One day, a letter arrived from a woman in a neighboring state. She wrote about how reading the stories had motivated her to reconnect with her own aging parents, to listen and learn in ways she never had before. "Your work is changing hearts," she wrote, "and that's the most powerful legacy anyone can leave." In that moment, Frank made a promise to himself, to continue living boldly, embracing change, and inspiring others to do the same, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. He remembered Elon Musk's words, "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." Frank knew he was far from forced to give up. He was just beginning a new chapter, one defined not by fear, but by courage and purpose. Frank's life had become a tapestry of small victories and daunting challenges, but just when he thought he understood the rhythm, life surprised him again in the most unexpected way. It began with a phone call from his estranged daughter, Emily. They hadn't spoken in nearly 15 years, a silence born from misunderstandings, distance, and unspoken pain. Frank's heart pounded as he heard her voice, tentative but real. "Dad, I've been following what you're doing, and I'm proud of you. Can we talk?" The years of regret and longing surged forward, mingling with hope. The invitation to reconnect felt like a fragile bridge spanning a deep canyon. Over the following weeks, they spoke slowly, cautiously rebuilding trust through shared memories, honest apologies, and new stories. Emily shared her own struggles, her fears of failure, the challenges of raising a family, and the ways Frank's work had inspired her from afar. Frank listened with a mixture of sorrow and joy, realizing that healing was possible even after years of silence. Their conversations became a source of renewal for Frank, reminding him that transformation wasn't just about external accomplishments but also about mending the heart. Emily's return rekindled old dreams of family gatherings, shared meals, and simple moments of connection that had been missing for so long. Frank invited her to visit the community center, to meet the people whose lives he had touched. Emily was moved by the vibrant energy and sense of purpose that filled the room. She met Lena and the volunteers, witnessing firsthand the impact of Frank's work. Seeing her father in this light, strong and compassionate despite the challenges he faced, deepened her respect and admiration. One afternoon, Emily surprised Frank with a gift, a carefully framed photo collage capturing moments from the program, smiling faces, workshops in progress, and candid snapshots of community members creating and celebrating. The day of the big town hall presentation arrived with a crisp autumn breeze that swept through the streets like a herald of change. Frank stood behind the podium, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves and excitement mingling in his chest. Months of planning, organizing, and rallying the community had led to this moment, a chance to present the impact of the Senior Innovation Program, the digital storytelling archive, and the growing movement of second acts that was reshaping lives. The community center was packed with faces, seniors, volunteers, local officials, young adults, and curious neighbors. Cameras were set up to broadcast the event live, reaching audiences beyond the town's borders. Frank glanced at Emily, who gave him a reassuring nod from the front row, then took a deep breath and began. His voice was steady but charged with emotion as he shared the stories of transformation that had emerged from the program. The hesitant retiree who discovered a passion for painting, the widower who found new friendship and purpose, the young volunteers who gained wisdom and inspiration from their elders. He spoke honestly about the challenges, the skepticism, the funding battles, his own health struggles, but framed them as integral parts of a larger narrative about resilience and hope. Throughout the presentation, Frank's message was clear: aging was not a period of decline but a time of opportunity, connection, and reinvention. The crowd was moved, many nodding or wiping tears as personal testimonies were shared live from participants and their families. When Frank finished, the room erupted in applause that felt like a tidal wave of support and affirmation. But the moment of truth came with the question and answer session that followed. One skeptical council member asked pointedly, "How can we be sure this program is sustainable? Isn't this just a temporary trend?" Another raised concerns about resource allocation and competing priorities in the community. Frank responded with calm conviction, emphasizing the program's growing partnerships, diverse funding sources, and proven impact on mental health, social cohesion, and lifelong learning. He invited everyone to see the initiative not as a cost but as an investment in the community's future. Emily stepped forward, sharing her perspective on how bridging technology and storytelling was creating new pathways for engagement and legacy building. The dialogue was candid and challenging, but it reflected a healthy democracy where ideas could be tested and strengthened. As the session concluded, the mayor rose to announce a new commitment: increased funding for the program and support for its expansion into neighboring towns. The declaration was met with cheers and standing ovations. For Frank, the moment was more than a victory, it was a validation of years of persistence and faith. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Frank was approached by a local journalist who asked about his journey. Frank spoke not just of his accomplishments but of the power of embracing change, the importance of community, and the endless potential in every stage of life. The interview would later be shared widely, inspiring many beyond the town's borders. That night, as Frank lay in bed, the weight of the day settled over him, not as exhaustion but as quiet fulfillment. He thought about the long path that had brought him here, the loneliness, the doubts, the sparks of hope, the hard work, the unexpected gifts. This moment of truth was a milestone, but also a reminder that the journey continued. Frank whispered to himself a line he had come to live by: "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." With that thought, he closed his eyes, ready to face whatever came next with courage and heart. The morning light poured gently through the curtains as Frank awoke feeling something he hadn't in years, a deep, unshakable sense of peace. The journey that had once felt so overwhelming, the loneliness, the regrets, the struggles with health and purpose, now seemed like the foundation of something far greater. He rose from bed slowly, savoring the quiet. His house, once filled with silence and shadows, now felt alive with possibility. Frank moved through his morning routine with mindful intention, each action a small affirmation of the life he was creating. He poured coffee and glanced at the framed photos on the wall, Emily's smiling face, Lena's steady presence, the snapshots of the community center filled with laughter and creativity. These were the markers of a new legacy. As Frank stepped onto his porch, the crisp autumn air greeted him, carrying the scents of fallen leaves and distant fires. The town was beginning to stir, and with it, the pulse of a community renewed. Frank's mind wandered to the words he'd heard so often during his journey, Elon Musk's relentless spirit, the courage to defy limits, the belief that failure was simply a step on the path forward. Those words weren't just abstract ideals, they had become a lived experience. Today, Frank was not just a man who had defied the odds, he was a beacon for others standing at their own crossroads, wondering if it was too late to change. He knew now that the real beginning wasn't a moment in the past or the future, it was this very day, this breath, this choice to live boldly. The community center buzzed with activity as Frank arrived, greeted warmly by familiar faces. He moved through the rooms where seniors painted, wrote, coded, and shared stories. The digital archive hummed quietly on screens, a testament to the collective wisdom and creativity flowing through the space. Lena approached, her eyes bright with excitement. "Frank, we just heard that the program received a national award for innovation in aging. They want us to share our model across the country." Frank smiled, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. The recognition was gratifying, but more than that, it was proof that their small town's vision was making waves far beyond its borders. Later, Emily joined him in the garden, the place where many conversations and dreams had blossomed. They sat side by side, watching as volunteers tended plants and shared laughter. "Dad," Emily said softly, "you've shown me that life's second acts can be even better than the first." Frank reached for her hand, feeling the warmth of connection and healing. "I was never too old," he replied, "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." As the sun dipped low, casting golden hues across the horizon, Frank understood that this was not an ending but a new beginning. One filled with hope, purpose, and endless possibility. Aging was not the closing of a chapter but the opening of a vast, uncharted story, waiting to be written by those brave enough to begin. And Frank was ready to write his story, day by day, step by step, with courage, love, and the unyielding belief that the best is always yet to come. Frank never imagined that his journey would continue to unfold beyond what he had once thought was the final chapter. But here he was, standing at the threshold of a new era, not just for himself, but for a movement that was gaining momentum across the country. The Senior Innovation Program had grown from a small idea sparked by one man's refusal to accept the narrative of aging as decline into a vibrant network of communities embracing change, creativity, and connection. As Frank stepped into the bustling conference hall in Washington, D.C., he felt a familiar mixture of nerves and determination. Today, he was not just a speaker. He was a symbol of possibility for millions of Americans aged 65 and older who felt forgotten or stuck, wondering if their best years were behind them. The event was a national summit on aging and innovation, drawing policymakers, advocates, entrepreneurs, and seniors themselves. Frank's story was highlighted as a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of resilience and vision. When he took the stage, the room fell quiet, all eyes on the man who had transformed his own life, and, in doing so, had ignited a fire in so many others. He began with a simple question: what if aging isn't the end, but the real beginning? The words echoed through the hall, stirring something deep in every listener. Frank shared the highs and lows of his journey, the loneliness that once engulfed him, the moment he found inspiration in Elon Musk's fearless approach to challenge and change, the small steps that led to big transformations. He spoke candidly about his health struggles and the fears that surfaced along the way, but also about the power of community, purpose, and persistence. The audience responded with warmth and enthusiasm, many nodding in recognition, some wiping away tears. Frank's message was clear: aging is not a time to retreat or resign, it is an opportunity to rewrite your story, to take bold steps toward fulfillment and impact. After his speech, Frank was approached by dozens of attendees eager to share their own experiences or ask for advice. He listened patiently, offering encouragement and practical suggestions. One woman, a retired schoolteacher named Gloria, told him she had started a local writing group inspired by his story, helping seniors in her town find their voices. Another man, Harold, spoke of rekindling his passion for woodworking after decades of putting it aside. These encounters reminded Frank that his legacy was not just his own, it was alive and growing in the hearts of others. The summit also sparked new collaborations and opportunities. Frank was invited to consult on initiatives aimed at improving senior engagement nationwide, to partner with technology firms designing user-friendly tools for older adults, and to mentor leaders who shared his vision. The work ahead was vast, but Frank felt invigorated rather than overwhelmed. Back at home, the community center buzzed with news from the summit. Volunteers celebrated the recognition, and plans began to take shape for new programs and outreach efforts. Emily and Lena stood by Frank's side, their partnership stronger than ever, their shared dream unfolding in ways they had only imagined. One afternoon, as Frank reviewed proposals for expanding the digital storytelling platform, he paused and reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The man he once was, quiet, uncertain, worn down by years of regret, felt distant, almost like a stranger. In his place stood someone renewed by experience, driven by purpose, and connected by love and community. He thought about Elon Musk's relentless drive and refusal to be limited by fear or convention. While Frank's path was different, the spirit was the same, a refusal to accept limits, a hunger to create, to inspire, and to live fully at every stage. Frank knew the work was far from over. There would be new challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But he was ready, armed with the lessons of his past and the support of a community that believed in the power of second acts. As the sun set on another day filled with possibility, Frank stood on his porch, looking out over the town that had become a beacon for change. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink, a reminder that endings could be beautiful beginnings in disguise. With a smile, Frank whispered to the night, "This is just the start." And with that, he stepped forward, into a future where age was no barrier, and legacy was not something left behind but something lived every day. Frank sat quietly in his favorite chair by the window, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow across the room. Outside, the leaves had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, swirling gently in the breeze like a slow dance marking the passage of time. He watched for a moment, feeling the weight and wonder of years. The losses, the gains, the moments of fear and courage that had shaped his life. His mind drifted back to the moment everything changed, years ago, when he first heard a quote from Elon Musk that challenged his understanding of what aging could mean. What if aging isn't the end, but the real beginning? Those words had planted a seed deep inside him, one that grew slowly but surely, transforming despair into determination, isolation into community, and regret into purpose. Frank's journey had not been easy. There were nights filled with loneliness and days shadowed by doubt. But through every trial, he found a spark, sometimes from a stranger's kindness, sometimes from the stubborn refusal to give up on himself. He remembered the moments when he started walking again, when he reached out to his daughter Emily, when he built the digital storytelling platform that connected seniors from all over the country. Each step had been a small victory, a thread in a tapestry that now stretched wide and strong. Today, Frank's work was recognized nationally, inspiring others to see aging not as a fading light but as a powerful source of wisdom, creativity, and connection. But for Frank, the true success was far more personal. It was the healing of fractured relationships, the friendships rekindled, and the knowledge that he mattered, that his life had meaning beyond the years. As he sipped his coffee, Frank's thoughts turned to the community center, the heartbeat of the movement he had helped create. Volunteers bustled about, seniors shared stories and laughter, and young people listened and learned. The energy was electric, a living testament to what was possible when people came together with open hearts and minds. Frank smiled softly, remembering a conversation with Lena just the day before. "We've come so far," she had said. But the best part is knowing there's still so much more to do. He agreed. The journey was ongoing, a circle that kept turning, bringing new faces and ideas into the fold. Frank's daughter Emily entered the room, holding a freshly printed letter in her hand. "Dad, this just came in from one of the new participants in the storytelling program," she said, sitting beside him. She wrote about how sharing her story helped her find peace after years of feeling invisible. Frank read the letter carefully, moved by the words that echoed his own experience. It was a reminder that every story told was a life reclaimed, a voice restored. They talked for a while about the future, plans to expand the program, to reach more communities, to keep pushing the boundaries of what aging could look like. As the evening settled, Frank felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had once believed that growing old meant fading away, but now he understood that it was a chapter rich with opportunity, influence, and love. He whispered to himself, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." Outside, the stars began to twinkle, lighting the sky like 1,000 tiny beacons of hope. Frank closed his eyes, embracing the quiet strength that came from a life fully lived, a legacy still in motion, and the promise of every new beginning waiting just around the corner. Frank stood at the edge of the hill overlooking the town, the cool breeze tousling his silver hair as he gazed out at the horizon painted with the soft glow of dawn. It was a sight he had witnessed countless times, yet each sunrise felt like a fresh promise, a reminder that every day held the potential for new beginnings. The journey that had started with a single spark, those words from Elon Musk questioning the nature of aging, had blossomed into a movement that touched lives far beyond his small community. As he breathed in the crisp morning air, Frank reflected on how far he had come. Once burdened by the weight of loneliness and doubt, he now carried a lightness born from purpose and connection. The world beyond his doorstep was no longer a place to fear or avoid, it was a canvas for creativity, growth, and impact. His thoughts drifted to the stories shared by countless seniors through the digital archive, a collection that had grown into a national treasure, a testament to the enduring spirit of those society often overlooked. Each narrative was a thread woven into the rich fabric of American life, vibrant with lessons, laughter, pain, and triumph. Frank's heart swelled with pride and humility knowing he had played a part in amplifying those voices. The summit in Washington, D.C. had been a turning point, opening doors to collaborations with leaders in technology, healthcare, and community development. Invitations poured in from organizations eager to adopt the model his town had pioneered. Frank had become a mentor and advisor, traveling across the country to share his story and listen to others. Yet, despite the growing spotlight, Frank remained grounded in the values that had carried him through his darkest days: authenticity, resilience, and the courage to embrace change. He understood now that aging was not a destination but a journey, one that could be filled with discovery and joy if only one dared to step beyond fear. Back home, Emily was busy organizing a new initiative, a program connecting seniors with local schools to foster intergenerational learning and creativity. Frank admired her energy and vision, seeing in her the continuation of the legacy they had built together. Lena, too, remained a steadfast partner, their friendship a source of strength and inspiration. As Frank prepared for the upcoming year, he set new goals, not just for expansion but for deepening impact. He envisioned a future where every community embraced its elders as treasures, where technology served as a bridge rather than a barrier, and where stories of aging were rewritten with hope and empowerment. One afternoon, as Frank visited a neighboring town that had recently adopted the storytelling platform, he was struck by a young woman named Sarah. She was volunteering to help seniors learn digital skills, her enthusiasm infectious. Sarah reminded Frank that the movement was about more than programs or policies, it was about people connecting across generations, sharing wisdom, and building bridges of understanding. Their conversation rekindled Frank's belief that the best was yet to come. That evening, as he walked home beneath a sky heavy with stars, Frank felt a profound sense of peace. Life had come full circle, from isolation to community, from doubt to confidence, from silence to voice. He knew the horizon was not an endpoint but an invitation, to keep dreaming, creating, and living with purpose. Frank looked up one last time, whispering, "There's always more ahead." And with that, he stepped forward, ready to embrace the endless possibilities beyond the horizon. Frank sat on a wooden bench in the town's central park, the sun warming his face as he watched children play and elders gather nearby. The park had become more than just a place of leisure, it was a vibrant crossroads where stories met and lives intertwined, a symbol of the transformation that had touched every corner of the community. When Frank first embarked on his journey, he could hardly have imagined how deeply the ripples of change would spread, not just in his town but across the country and even beyond. It was a testament to the power of one person's decision to refuse the limits that society so often imposed on age and possibility. Over the years, Frank had witnessed incredible stories unfold, stories of rediscovered passions, healed relationships, and newfound friendships. There was Martha, the retired nurse who had started a community garden that fed dozens of families, Tom, who had launched a podcast sharing his life lessons and became a mentor to young entrepreneurs. And Helen, who found joy in painting again after decades of putting her dreams aside. Each story was a stone tossed into the pond, creating ripples that spread outward, touching lives in unexpected ways. Frank's own life had become a living example of this truth. The digital storytelling archive he helped create had blossomed into a vast repository of wisdom and experience, accessible to anyone seeking inspiration or connection. Schools incorporated the platform into their curriculum, teaching students the value of history told through personal narratives. Healthcare providers used the stories to better understand the emotional journeys of aging patients. Policy makers looked to the model as a blueprint for inclusive, empowering community programs. But the impact wasn't just practical, it was deeply personal. Frank often received letters and messages from people across the nation, some facing their own struggles with aging, others celebrating newfound purpose sparked by his story. These messages reminded him that change, no matter how small it seemed, could ignite hope and transformation in ways beyond measure. One crisp autumn afternoon, Frank was invited to speak at a regional conference focused on aging and technology. As he stood before the audience, he shared not only the successes but also the challenges, the doubts, the setbacks, the moments when giving up seemed easier. He emphasized the importance of persistence and community, encouraging others to see aging as a phase rich with opportunity rather than limitation. After his talk, a young woman approached him with tears in her eyes. She explained how her grandfather had become withdrawn and lonely after retirement until he found solace in the storytelling program inspired by Frank's work. "You gave him a reason to wake up each morning," she said. "You gave him hope." That moment stayed with Frank, a powerful reminder that legacy was not about fame or accolades but about touching hearts and changing lives. Back in town, the community center was buzzing with new energy. Workshops on digital literacy, creative arts, and wellness were filled with eager participants, bridging generations and backgrounds. Frank walked through the rooms, greeting friends and newcomers alike, feeling the pulse of life and possibility. Lena joined him, sharing news of a grant that would allow them to expand outreach to rural areas where isolation was a serious concern. Together, they dreamed of a future where no senior would feel invisible or forgotten. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the town, Frank reflected on the journey. The moments of fear and hope, the hard-earned victories, and the enduring power of connection. He knew the ripples of change would continue to spread, fueled by courage, creativity, and compassion. With a heart full of gratitude, Frank whispered into the fading light, "This is only the beginning." Frank woke to the soft light filtering through the window, the promise of a new day filling him with quiet anticipation. The journey that had carried him from despair to purpose was still unfolding, each morning a blank page waiting for the story he chose to write. Today felt different, not because of any grand event, but because of a deep sense of readiness. He rose and moved through his morning routine with a mindful calm, savoring the small moments that had once seemed ordinary but now held profound meaning. The community center awaited, bustling as always with voices, laughter, and the hum of creativity. Frank's work had evolved into more than a program. It had become a movement fueled by the collective dreams and efforts of many. As he stepped into the center, he was greeted by familiar faces, seniors learning new skills, volunteers organizing events, and young people bridging the generational gap. Emily approached him, her eyes shining with excitement. "Dad, the new outreach project is launching next week. We're partnering with local schools and tech companies to bring digital storytelling to underserved communities." Frank smiled, proud of the momentum that had grown from a simple spark years ago. "It's amazing how one idea can ripple out and touch so many lives," he said. Lena joined them, adding, "And the feedback has been incredible, people are rediscovering their voices and purpose." Frank felt a swell of gratitude. The fears that once held him captive, the doubts about relevance, the ache of loneliness, had been replaced by hope and connection. Yet, he knew that embracing tomorrow required continual courage and adaptability. Aging wasn't a static state but a dynamic journey, demanding openness to change and the willingness to step into uncertainty. Later that afternoon, Frank attended a workshop where seniors were experimenting with virtual reality technology to capture and share memories. Watching participants' faces light up as they navigated the digital landscapes, Frank felt the power of innovation to bridge isolation and foster community. Technology, once intimidating, had become a tool for empowerment. That evening, as twilight settled, Frank sat on his porch, reflecting on the path that had brought him here. The struggles, the breakthroughs, the unexpected friendships, it all formed a tapestry richer than he had ever imagined. He thought about Elon Musk's fearless mindset, the relentless drive to challenge norms and create futures others couldn't see. While Frank's journey was different, it shared that same spirit of rebellion against limitations. "Aging is not a cage," he whispered to the stars above. "It's a launch pad." As the night deepened, Frank wrote in his journal, capturing thoughts and dreams for the future. He imagined expanding the movement globally, inspiring elders everywhere to reclaim their stories and rewrite the narrative around aging. He saw communities transformed by intergenerational bonds and technology that honored experience while fostering growth. Most of all, he saw a world where no one felt too old to matter, to love, to learn, or to lead. With a heart full of hope and a spirit ready for whatever came next, Frank closed his journal and looked toward the horizon. The future was unwritten, vast, and filled with promise. He was ready to embrace it fully, knowing that every day held the power to begin again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?